Thanks for joining the Holistic Selling podcast today. Please join me in welcoming Carie Buchanan to today's episode. Carie is a highly recognized customer success and customer experience executive in the SaaS B2B industry. She's known for building and scaling high-performing customer-facing organizations, driving customer retention, expansion, and lifetime value, and bridging customer success, product, and go-to-market teams. Carie's leadership centers on transforming customer success into a strategic growth engine, aligning customer experience, revenue, and product value. Beyond her operator role, Carie is also an active thought leader, publishing insights on topics such as reframing customer-facing functions as drivers of growth, as well as the role of AI and architecture in modern SaaS companies. Carie brings a strategic, forward-looking perspective on how companies can modernize their customer experience models to compete in increasingly digital and AI-driven markets. So you can see why I look forward to the conversation with Carie today. So, Carie, welcome to the podcast. Happy to have you. Please take a moment to introduce yourself.
Yeah, thank you. I'm really excited. And you and I worked together in the past, so it's fun to reunite our experience together. I spent about half my career in consulting. I started at Accenture, where I actually built systems and helped customers with operating models. And then when I left, it's kind of funny because I said I would never actually go work for a software company, and that's all I've done since. I spent the rest of my career in the SaaS world, focused on building and rebuilding customer success organizations. So really excited to talk about our topics today because I've got a lot to say.
That's great. And as you know, the holistic selling framework is built to enable value creation at every step of the customer lifecycle. That lifecycle is often depicted as an infinity loop that starts with the lead generation and sales processes and steps on one side, and then the implementation, retention, growth, and advocacy steps on the other side. The goal of that virtuous loop is to convert prospects to customers, customers to advocates, to fuel that organic growth over time. So, Carie, let's start there. Which best practices have you seen companies use to optimize their success throughout the customer lifecycle journey?
I think companies that do this really well, they really start by treating value alignment as a non-negotiable. It's not a nice to have. And then they look at the customer life cycle as a connected system and not as a series of handoffs. Now, I've spent a lot of time dealing with retention, and churn rarely happens because of one big failure or one team. It happens because there's a series of small disconnects that start sometimes as early as the sales conversations. And so one of the things that I've been really focused on probably in the last 5 years is around defining what value looks like from the customer's perspective and then carrying that context all the way through the ongoing relationship. And it evolves over time. So what that customer values maybe when you first meet with them will change. Once you understand what that value means, identifying what that is, but then operationalizing it. It's building it into everything from how people sell, how the product develops, what does implementation, onboarding look like, how do you show up with your success plans. And I would even argue in the support side of the house, which is, something, within my world of influence to really help remove the friction between the teams. And then I think you need to have the systems to support it, right? So it's ideal to put that value or what that value looks like and embed it in the product itself. So showing them how they're getting value revenue so that it doesn't become dependent on the people. You still want the people to help point that out, but I think if you could align all of that into one package, then you got it made. It's not easy, but once you do it, everything is easy.
Right. Value is the common thread throughout the entire customer life cycle. We definitely want to lead with value in the sales cycle, make sure that value is clarified with the customer based on the business outcomes early and often to make sure that we're aligned with how the customer defines success. How do you define value for the customer? What have you seen that works in your experience?
Well, I think it's understanding what are they trying to do. Like in the 1970s, there was the value realization model. I think it was like Toyota or someone developed this value realization model. And basically, it was looking at two levers. You're either trying to make money, drive revenues, or you're trying to lower costs. Those are like the very basics. I would add, because I'm in customer experience, it's making your customers happy or improving that customer experience. But if you start with those and then look at what these customers are trying to achieve, how do they drive revenues? What are the things that they're looking at to drive revenues? For example, my last company that I was at was within the restaurant industry. So they're trying to obviously increase revenues, but one of the key triggers for them is growing online revenues. So if your software helps them grow those online revenues, what are all the things within your platform that help do it? We've been very focused on looking at specific features, usage, adoption of certain factors, but what are the things that really help them get more money, that drive the revenues? So if you can get back to that very basic thinking around how does my product help customers drive those revenues or lower those costs, that's what you focus on. And it shouldn't be too many, because I think that's the other thing. Customers get so lost and confused in our products. There's probably a couple things they have to do well or right within the product to do one of those things, right? So it's really starting with those very basic, very core organic outcomes that customers are trying to achieve, and then going from there.
I agree. Understanding what the customers want to get done is critical. It's important to focus on their business outcomes and then convert those business outcomes into an expression of value early in the sales cycle. And then, in your experience, if we do this right on the sales side, how does that get translated to the implementation side of the process?
I think this is where the first breakdown really happens, when you're moving from I've sold the customer on this value proposition, and then I get into implementation. And traditionally, what implementation teams have done is they go and they implement the whole platform. And what I really feel, and I've done this with my own teams, is that when you're going into implementation, you should focus on that minimum viable product. Let me get those things done that are going to help you achieve the outcomes that you signed up for. One of the breakdowns is that the customers, they're going through this implementation, and they're so overwhelmed. So what I've actually told my teams is that when we're doing implementation, let's get everything up and running that is tied to those outcomes that they're trying to achieve, and focus on that. If I can prioritize those things that are going to help drive the value, and then that helps really show that value right up front. So it's a prioritization of what you should be implementing. And then I think it almost gets to a conversation of how should we be selling. If I were to sell, in smaller chunks, I sell this and then I have the opportunity to add something on later and add something on later. That's actually better for the customer, but maybe not so great for the salesperson that's trying to hit quota. So there's a little bit of give and take there. But for me, if I know that I have to implement this big thing, I'm going to focus on the things that are going to get them to value the quickest first.
Regardless of the size of the solution that is sold to the customer, as you pointed out, it's really important to focus on what you call time to first value. Make sure that on the implementation side, the solutions are separated in phases so that you can deliver value to the customer as quickly as possible based on the business outcomes they seek to achieve.
Right.
So I think that's always very important.
Yeah.
Now, you talked about breakdown and disconnects between sales and implementation. What have you seen that works best to avoid that breakdown?
How do you make sure your teams are aligned across that value? I do think that AI is helping, because it actually helps create that shared understanding of the customer and what they're trying to achieve. So today we have technology where sales teams are able to record and track what the conversations have happened with the customer. Today, with technology, that is giving us a really great picture of capturing all that information so that we can understand almost in real time what was said, and then being able to take that information. We used to do this when you and I worked together. We had a template that sales had to fill out. We created this one-page template and tracked all this information, and then we can go hand this over to the implementation team. Now, I think teams are getting smarter where they'll have implementation get involved in those sales conversations. I think by using some of the technology to help us with it, because what happens, and I've seen this so many times and I've gotten this feedback from customers, is that they go and tell their heart out, right, to the salesperson, everything and all the problems. And then they get into implementation and the implementation says, okay, tell me what's going on, right? And then they have to start all over. And that becomes like this first kind of part where the customer's like, oh, I just told you all this stuff. So I do think technology is helping us with that transition because we get so much good information in sales. And as long if we can capture that and translate that in what that looks like. And I think that also requires implementation to change how they think and how they do the discovery. So there's a getting involved early, but also leveraging some of these tools that we now have today in place to help us with that.
Agree. We'll talk more about AI in a few minutes. What I've experienced very successfully is the concept of what I would call concurrent engineering, meaning you bring the implementation team in the sales cycle to validate the solution blueprint to ensure that that solution can be deployed in multiple steps based on this concept of time to first value. You also want to make sure that there's clarity from an implementation standpoint on the business case. We want to make sure that the value realization blueprint that we sold to the customer is also approved by the implementation team. So it's really important to bring the implementation team into the sales cycle to approve the solution blueprint and the value realization blueprint before the deal gets closed so that everybody's on the same page. Similarly, once we start implementation, it's really important to keep the sales team engaged by way of attending steering committee calls and the like to ensure there's continuity. And I've always recommended for the sales executive or account manager who concluded the deal with the customer to stay involved through the implementation phase to ensure alignment with, are we implementing the solution as intended? Are we getting the value that was expected? Have you seen similar best practices on your side?
I have seen that. I think that's a great best practice. The other thing that I've actually implemented was actually have sales lead the initial kickoff call when you go into implementation. I think that's important. Having them involved when you do those first kickoff sessions. I may have been engaged as an implementation person in a sales cycle. Then we get into implementation and then something was missed or you didn't tell me this. So you get that salesperson to have that accountability to be a part of that first kickoff call. And then I love having sales involved in the steering committee. I think it's also a great time if you've got customer success that's going to be assigned to that account, getting them as part of implementation as well, getting them to be a part of some of those key meetings. And I think it's also important, like from a sales perspective, it depends on companies' sales models and how are those salespeople incented. If there's opportunity for them to actually uh, have additional sales down the road, it's important. And you got to look at the incentive and the comp models to make sure they're incented in some way to participate in that, because that's also where it gets hard. As sales is like, why am I staying a part of this if there's nothing in it for me? So making sure that you look at the comp structure to make sure that it is something that's valuable for their time to help make that customer successful for the future as well.
I'm glad you brought this up. I think the incentive for the sales executives and account managers is that if the customer is successfully deployed, maybe there's opportunities for upsell and cross-sell. Maybe there's opportunities to turn the customer into an advocate that they then can leverage for additional sales cycles with new prospects. So there's plenty of incentives for the sales executives and the account managers to participate post-sale in the customer relationship to ensure that the customer is satisfied with the outcome.
Yeah.
Now, talking about customer satisfaction, it's an interesting concept because, yes, you can measure satisfaction by way of CSAT and NPS, etc. But I think the concept has evolved in recent years to be more than just satisfaction towards the notion of value realization. What have you seen that works best in being able to measure the value realized by the solutions that have been deployed at the customer side?
What I see the best practice is being able to build and capture that within the product itself, right? So for example, if your product is helping customers, let's say, get more leads, if you're not tracking and showing that within the product, there's a problem. So whatever you can do to build it into the product itself is key. If my value or my outcome is to help you drive more pipeline, I should be able to easily see that happening in my product. The other thing is I think you do need to have some baselining with the customer of what are they trying to achieve? What are the outcomes they're trying to achieve? I'll give you a great example. I had a customer who was spending X amount of dollars per month on our software, and they had expectations to grow their revenues by 3 times. When we actually went in to look to see what the revenues that we are driving, we were like not even getting to 100%. So they basically were spending more money on the software than they were getting value from it. So being able to understand what value means in their mind. One of the reasons why I got so focused on value is in my world, when I get measured on retention and customers churn, one of the things I always hear from them is, well, we're not getting value. Well, what does that mean? So some of it is understanding who your ideal customer profile is and what they're trying to achieve. And then some of it is just actually talking to the customer and doing some sort of baselining. I think companies, especially with larger companies, are doing some form of a business review with the customer, some sort of checking in, making sure that we're hitting those things. I think the only thing I would say is changing in the business review world is how we do it, and that we're very focused only on those outcomes, right? And I think why companies struggle is they've got to define what that ROI is, and then be very laser focused around how you deliver it.
I'm a big proponent that you got to use value on the front end. You got to sell value. You got to understand the customer's business outcomes and make sure that value is clearly tied to those business outcomes.
Yeah.
But then on the other side, we got to make sure we keep track of the value realization. So how do you keep track of the value that's been realized by the customer? Have you seen any specific best practices there to automate the process of value realization?
Well, yeah. So the companies that are selling their products are sitting on a ton of data. And it's data that a lot of times isn't exposed. Customers can't see it. And this was my one point around, well, if you could expose it into the product itself. The other thing I've seen that has worked well is that the data is sitting there behind the scenes. So what companies have done is they've done these monthly scorecards that show the return on investment. So if you can't actually do it in your product, you send something out that is basically a snapshot, like an ROI snapshot, to show the customer that they're getting this value. Ideally, you shouldn't wait until a quarterly business review or an annual business review. It needs to be something that gets shared frequently. Then maybe your customer's up and running for a while and you see some bad trending. That's when you can actually reach out to the customer and say, I want to get together and talk about some things that, I'm seeing. But you have to get that in front of the customer on a regular basis in some way that's easy for them to see it. And I think the other thing is you need to help customers articulate what that value is, because sometimes they don't even know. And that's the scary part, was when you're working with a customer and they're not really sure. So working with them to understand what that is. So we sit on so much data. It's crazy how much data is out there. It's really figuring out how do you get that data into a format that customers can see it, that's handy, easy, it's not difficult for them to understand.
One of the benefits of the SaaS world is that as a solution provider, we can actually track adoption and utilization of the solutions, and we can derive value from that adoption and utilization so that we can share those numbers with the customers on a regular
Yeah.
basis. And you are correct. I'm a big believer of the customer success managers sharing those data points with customers on a monthly basis and then feeding down to the QBR, EBR process on a quarterly or semi-annual basis. Because again, it's really important to keep focusing on utilization as a precursor to value realization. Value realization is the key to retention, growth, and advocacy at the end of the day. Moving on from implementation to the rest of the life cycle of the customer, what have you seen as best practices to actually convert a successful customer to an advocate?
That's a good question. I think it's kind of along the same lines that we've been talking about. On they want to be able to see the value that they're getting. But one of the things that I've implemented over the last couple of years is really becoming more predictive to help customers. So sometimes customers don't even know they're in trouble, or they don't know things aren't going well. And being able to get ahead of that, to be able to help them see things might be going the wrong way. It's how do you come to them with recommendations that help them be better, do better than what they're already doing? How do you point out things that they could be doing differently or better? Right? Customers look to you as the experts. I'll never forget a time where it was a big customer, and they get their teams together, once a year to talk about planning, came in with all these like best practices. And they basically said, you guys are the experts. Just tell us what you think we should do. And we were like, yeah, well, we know what we think you should do. So at the time, it was me and my customer success manager. We decided, because it was a 2-day meeting, that the next day we were going to change our whole format. And we came in and said, okay, here's what you're not doing well. Here's the things that you need to start doing. Here's recommendations that we think are going to be beneficial. Basically, kind of pointing this all out. And they were like, they looked at us and like, oh wow, no one's ever told us that before. And so they're like, we need to go spend some time. So that all these VPs got together and went back and started talking. We need to be very prescriptive in how we make our customers successful. Not only showing them that they are successful, would be very prescriptive about that, because then that's when they come to rely on us as a true partner and not just another vendor.
I like that notion. I think that's very well said. Now, obviously, we live in a world of AI, Carie. What have you seen as the impact of AI in delivering customer success from your experience?
Well, let me say I don't think we're delivering it well yet. I do think AI is going to fundamentally change how we deliver customer success, right? But probably not in the way that people are thinking right now. Right now, we're very focused on like getting data faster and making things more efficient. I think we're just like starting to scrape the surface of what we could really do. I think what I'm most excited about is I was just alluding to a little bit around how we can actually become more predictive, finding risk and seeing risk before like it even happens, right? The customers wouldn't even know like something went wrong, right? We're getting ahead of that. And then being way more personalized, seeing where there might be expansion, seeing why there might be gaps with what's going on with that customer. I heard a statistic that companies that are truly transforming with AI, it's only like 4% of the companies that are out there. I've spent a lot of time thinking about this. What they're doing is they're not just taking existing ways of doing work or existing workflows or even existing models and putting them to AI, they're starting all over. They're starting all over, reimagining what the experience could look like with AI. And it might be a whole different way of working, really letting AI handle these signals that are happening, the noise, the risk detection, the data flows. And so that we as people can really spend that time not only being prepared, proactive, and adding really value to our conversations, but being able to spend time building those relationships. And I do think everyone's worried about AI taking jobs. I don't see that happening. I see maybe there being less jobs of things that were like really basic and administrative to do, but it's now giving us more time to spend with customers. I actually saw another comment this week from someone in the customer success world where if you look at the current makeup of, let's say, customer success managers today, 80% of them do generic work where it's like 20% are really out focused talking to customers, building those relationships, really like being strategic with customers. With AI and technology, it's going to allow us to flip that. The other thing I am super excited about is as a past chief customer officer and leader, we always have struggled with segmentation models. And I think AI gives us the ability now to be more of a white glove treatment for everyone. You might have AI helping give attention to these smaller customers, but today they're not getting any attention or they're getting very generic attention. So it really helps us flatten how we work with our customers. And you're still going to want to obviously have, for very big enterprise customers, people that are assigned and dedicated to these accounts. But those that tend to struggle with getting attention, now we're going to be able to get it, but just in a different way, leveraging AI.
Well said. I think that AI will be a tremendous force in automation and simplification of business processes. At the same time, I think the role of your frontline team members will be to humanize the experience. At the end of the day, people buy from people they know and trust. And that trust factor is not going to be delivered by an AI engine. That trust factor will be delivered by your frontline team members in the way that they behave with and in front of customers, leveraging AI as
Yeah.
a tool in the process. So I think it's going to be very complementary.
I think it gives us the ability to spend more quality time with customers when there's more strategic conversations, or like I'm really trying to think through, I've got these issues, I've got these problems, I'm not really sure where to go, what to do. Then that's when you have these like really good, meaningful, strategic conversations that are we're very well prepared. We've got a lot of insight into this customer, so we can actually come in with better recommendations, so much more of a rich conversation. And then me as a person that's going to meet with that customer, I can really have a good discussion, be very well prepared, have really good recommendations that come through that, which in the past we tend to be generic. Like I was talking about before, here's some best practices, right? Pick one of these, they might work for you, right? Versus
Yeah.
here's exactly what I think you should do. What do you think about it? So that's what I'm really excited about. It gives us that like much more richer conversations with our customer.
I agree. So let me summarize the conversation today. We started talking about the definition of value and why value is so important to unify and streamline between the sales side of the house and the customer success side of the house. You mentioned that the best case scenario that you're recommending for value to be embedded in the product itself. I thought that was a very good insight. What is clear is that we need to have a very good definition of the value realization model together with the solution blueprint to make sure that the customer is very clear as to what value they're going to get from buying a solution. And we can use that same value realization model through implementation to deliver on the promise that was given to the customer as part of the sales experience. That will prevent the breakdown between sales and implementation in ensuring that everybody's on the same page. We talked about this notion of concurrent engineering, where you want to pull the implementation team in the sales process. You also want to make sure the sales team is involved in the implementation process to create that unified experience and expectation from the customer standpoint. You mentioned focusing on outcomes, making sure that those outcomes and proofs of value are embedded in monthly scorecards that can be shared with the customer by the customer success team to make sure we can convert those customers into customer advocates. You also talked about the notion of being prescriptive as to how we can make the customer successful, which I think is important because the customers are counting on us to implement the solution in ways that will deliver on their business outcomes and deliver the value that they're expecting. And finally, we had a conversation about AI, and you see AI as a tool that will accelerate and improve internal processes, will reduce risk, will improve personalization for the customer. So thanks for the conversation today, Carie. I wanted to turn it back to you to leave you with your call to action. What would you like the audience to take away from the podcast today?
We talked a lot about value, and obviously getting aligned around values is it's not easy. I think if you can do it and make sure that everyone is incented similarly, right? You don't want metrics, hitting against each other. You want to make sure that they're all that there's alignment there. But I would say we are at this great moment right now where we have this opportunity. People are trying to figure out what to do. Everyone's kind of like, how am I going to leverage all this new technology? To take a step back and rethink, what if you could do this in a perfect world, what would this look like? How could I now, with all these tools and capabilities and technology that I have, really think about this customer experience, and how do I actually look at it from this outcome based lens? Because if you think about, if you were actually helping customers achieve the outcomes that they're trying to get, everything's easy. The hard part is getting there. But if you can get there and get that alignment across the organization, I think that's the most important thing.
Yeah. Very well said, Carie. Thank you so much for your contribution today, for your insights. I look forward to staying in touch and talking again very soon. Thanks again, Carie, for joining the podcast today.
Thank you for having me. This was a lot of fun.